I saw a lot of my grandchildren, and I do appreciate the fact that today they all remember that. Hello, Jack.
You normally call me Jason.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, I'm sitting here with my grandmother, Mrs. May Regan. Whereabouts were you born, Gran?
A place called Buninyong, which doesn't exist today, but there is a road called Buninyong Road, just a little bit east of Dubbo. My father was a schoolmaster and he had a school there. His name was Roy Godfrey. Before I was married, I was May Godfrey. My earliest memory is when I was about 3, I think.
And what was that memory?
Giving me a ride on his leg. Dancy, dancy, diddly-dee, he used to say, and give me a ride on his leg.
That was your first memory of him?
I think it might be. He used to go like this with his leg, and I'd go... Well, he did that with all his children. He was very stern. We always had to promptly do what we were told. Any remiss
shenanigans
would be quickly
reprimanded.
Yes.
Where was he from originally?
Puramal, near Mudgee. My first memories of being anywhere was at Kangaroo Valley. We lived beside a river, Kangaroo River. It was beautiful. We had very happy days there, because by then there were more of us. Ilma was the first, Errol was the second, I was the third, Keith was the fourth, Nance was the fifth, and Rex was the sixth. Nance was born at Kangaroo Valley.
And how old were you when you went to Kangaroo Valley?
I know when we left there, I was 9. We had a lovely flower garden and a beautiful vegetable garden, and because we lived beside the river, we used to carry water up in cans to the garden from the river.
Tell me some more about your father.
He was a great student. He had a wonderful general knowledge, great reader. I remember he used to lecture at teachers' conferences. In every district there used to be a sort of a annual gathering of teachers, and Dad used to always be preparing his speech on all sorts of subjects. He's very knowledgeable.
Describe him physically to me so that I can get a picture of him.
About Godfrey's height, about Godfrey's build. He was very fair, and I always remember when he passed away he didn't have a wrinkle. He was 87. Beautiful skin. I think that's where my skin comes from.
So do you think you got a lot of your longevity from your father?
I think I might have. And his mother died at 93 because she had a fall, and she went to hospital for the first time in her life and didn't come out.
Some people cop it rough.
Yeah.
And what about your mother? Tell me about your mum.
Mother was very beautiful.
Aesthetically, are you like your mother or father, or like a bit of both?
No, I'm not a bit like my father. My skin might be, but I'm more like Mother. I've got brown eyes like Mother, and she was a very loving mother, very loving. She was wonderful to all of us children, you know. I suppose we behaved because we had to, but she was very caring and very, very gracious. Yes.
And where was she from?
She was born at Puramal, where Dad was born. Their mothers were friends, and we're told when Dad was 3 months old, he was taken to see Mrs. Foster's daughter. That was the first time they met, when she was born. He went away and he travelled a lot around the world before he decided to become a teacher. They didn't ever discuss how he came back to her. I don't know. But they were married in 1900. And her name was Lucy Foster. She was about as tall as Ilma, I think. She wasn't thin, but she wasn't fat. She was just a good figure in those days. And she was a very good cook. I remember that.
Like mother, like daughter.
I wouldn't say that.
And so tell me about your siblings. Tell me about...
Ilma was the oldest, and she was a school teacher too. And she didn't ever marry, and she was very beautiful. She died at 90. Yes, she was born in 91 and she died at 90. And she was a wonderful needlewoman and had a beautiful voice, soprano. Lovely voice.
What, did you have a piano at your place? Did you all stand around the piano and sing? Or?
I had a violin. We all sang to Dad's violin.
Now, I understand that Godfrey might have inherited some of that. Did Godfrey play the violin when he was younger?
Yes, when he was 5. His first appearance with the violin at a concert with Miss Roper in Campbell.
Was he any good?
I don't think he kept it. Once he went to school, he didn't do it, you see.
He got into sport.
Mad on sport. Football. Godfrey was harder to teach than Ross. He used to say he wanted to go out in the paddocks with the men. I was trying to teach him a poem. He said, well, I can't see what good it'll do me.
Can you remember what the poem was?
No, I forget the poem. But I kept him in until he learned it. This is the days when it was too far away to go to school, so I had to have correspondence lessons.
Tell me more about your siblings, more about your brothers and sisters.
Yes, Errol was pretty clever. He was a school teacher too. I was a school teacher too. Keith and Rex both went to agricultural schools, first to Yanco, then Hawkesbury, and by then Dad was living at Manildra, and he settled Keith on a property there. But the war started then, 39, and both of them enlisted. But Keith was rejected because they found he had a murmur on his heart. Rex went to the war. He was in the Middle East, and he came back and never quite recovered. His body was covered with...
He had a disease that affected his hair follicles, didn't he?
Yeah. They said they only knew of one other case in the world, and when he was in PA hospital for 2 years, every Wednesday he was taken down to show skin specialists from all over the world came to look. But after very, very severe treatment, they didn't cure him exactly, but made him better. So he had a war record and was never really well after he came back.
That must have been tough to see, your brother come back from the war, and you were very fond of Rex too, I recall you telling me.
Yes.
He was your little brother?
Yes. See, he was born in 14 and I was 9, and I called him my baby. I was so thrilled to have a baby. I was close to Errol too, because when I went to school in Sydney, Errol was at school in Sydney, and he used to come and see me every Sunday, and we used to go to the town hall to an organ recital, because it didn't cost us anything.
Have you mentioned all your siblings?
No, I never had much to do with Nance. She was between Keith and Rex, because Rex had come along then, so I was so infatuated with Rex, the baby. Nance would have been about 4 when he was born.
You must have been a special guy. I would have loved to have met Rex.
Yes, he was very special. I don't know why, but anyway...
Was he funny? Was he a character as he got older?
A hard case. My mother's mother, my granny, used to talk with a wobble. She was pretty... well, she wasn't that old, but she was sort of frail. And I can remember him walking behind her and doing the same thing. Tumbling over. He'd fall over all sorts of things. I can remember that.
I'd just like to hear a little bit more about your children growing up. Just a brief little thing about each of them.
Dilma was the oldest, and because we were so far out of town from a school, they all had to have correspondence lessons. Ilma did right up to the intermediate at home. After she got the intermediate, came down into 4th year at Loreto. Yes. But she'd never been to a school before, and she was a boarder at Loreto at Kirribilli for the last 2 years. And then she went to Henrietta Street to learn kindergarten work at Henrietta Street, Waverley. And then when she left there, after having got her certificate to teach, she came home and didn't do any teaching anymore.
So what did she do at home?
Oh, well, I don't know. Of course, Godfrey came home too after he did the leaving. And, of course, they went out so much all over New South Wales, you know, parties. And Godfrey was mad on football. I always remember when he first came home, he'd see someone walking in the street in Campbell. He'd go up and ask him, did he ever play football? Because he could tell the way he walked, he'd be a good footballer. And he started union up there.
And Gabrielle?
Oh, well, of course, she had a very quiet life because there was no one home. They'd all gone away to school. I think she might have been very lonely because the nearest neighbour was about 2 miles away, and she was able to go to school in Campbell because by this time a bus had been on the road. But because she used to get asthma and dusty roads, she might have to be home 1 week in 4 or 5. So she went off to school when she was 11, down to just this side of Bunnan to board, and she was only there a little while, and she told the nun she wanted to leave because she thought all the girls were too young, all her age, because she was old because she'd never been with young people. And when Godfrey was 19, Paul bought a property out at Corinda, Lower Quamburn it was called, and Godfrey went out to run it, and I went out with him for 6 weeks. The first 6 weeks he was there, and he kept that for a while and then sold it very well. By the time he sold that, Paul wasn't well enough to be running Fairy Bower, so he came home to look after Fairy Bower.
What did Uncle Ross do?
We bought him a place which had belonged to his Uncle Oz. When Uncle Oz died, he left so much to each niece or nephew, and we helped Ross buy Ozzy's old property, Kabunya, and he stayed there for a few years. By this time, Gabrielle had finished school at Rose Bay, and she was doing a business course, and he came down, and the job that she just left, he took over, and he's been in travel ever since. He's got a very responsible job. I just forget what it is. P&O's sort of sold up to another company now, and it's all changed. But he's been very, very busy organising all this changeover too. Ross had about 3 trips around the world. He sold his place and enjoyed it.
Meeting the world.
Yeah.
What did Ilma do?
Oh, well, she just stayed at home and
met a cantankerous jackanape.
Until she married, and she went down to a property not that far away, close enough to be in touch, and had 3 sons eventually.
And tell us a bit about Gabrielle.
Gabrielle, after she left school, she went straight and did a business course, and ever that time she's worked for a living.
And then, of course, the grandchildren.
Yes. Saw a lot of my grandchildren. The first was Bruce, the second was Ross, the third was Davina. You were 70. The next was Edwina, next was Lucy, and the next was Paul. Yeah.
3 beautiful, beautiful girls, an absolute joy to grow up with. But, yeah, when Paul came along, it was good for them, too, to have a little brother.
Yeah. Yes. People say that he's very amusing at a party. He's the life of the party. He and Sky, his friend, have been away for 10 months travelling around America.
Tell me a little bit about my big brother, Bruce.
Yes. Well, Bruce was a beautiful little baby, and he was very fond of his grandfather. I've got a picture of his grandfather sitting on the seat out in the front of
Gurianawar.
He was about 18 months old. Talk his head off.
So they had a connection?
They did, yes. Yes. And I don't think he liked school very much.
I think we all liked Tudor House a fair bit, though.
I think they liked Tudor, yes, he did. He liked Tudor House, but he wasn't very happy at King's.
Bruce had nice high windows to jump out of at Tudor House. And he had a beautiful voice. He sang in the choir.
Yes.
I think he probably, to this day, is still talked about for having the most beautiful voice that ever went through the Tudor House choir.
I've never heard him sing.
Well, he's lost that now when his voice broke. It was like one of the world's last great tragedies when Bruce's voice broke. He sung like a bird. It was beautiful.
And since then, he's done many, many things. Joined up to become a commando, which he did very effectively, coming top of the class. And he went round the Americas, didn't he? Scotland, because he worked there. He was someone's bodyguard for a long while there. England and Scotland.
And then found himself in America where he met his beautiful bride, Faith?
Yes, yes. And because he didn't have a work visa...
Well, he was working for the UN for a while there in New York.
That's right. He was working for the United... Then he would belong to the United Nations. And he was down at Acapulco, I think it was.
Guatemala.
Oh, Guatemala. Looking after a singer, a Greek girl.
And now he's in Manhattan, married with Faith, and heading up the security team for a big firm there in the middle of Manhattan.
Yes. When he wasn't working, he studied hard and went right through to get a master's degree in leadership through Armidale University. Did tremendous research for that. He sent me the papers, and I couldn't believe the research he did. And his flow of English had improved to such an extent.
Tell us a little bit about Ross. Ross is always very involved in the arts, and Ross went to Newcastle University for a little while.
Yes, and Sydney University for a while. And then he had a terrible accident, which put him out of gear for a long while. It was about 12 months before he was really able to walk properly.
You helped him a lot through that period, didn't you?
Well, I went to him when it happened. They rang me when it happened, and when I got to the hospital, and they said that his brain... He had injuries, but his brain was all right because they'd already given him a scan. His shin bone was sticking out the skin. Dreadful.
Well, thank God he can walk now, and he can sort of get around.
He's having trouble with it, though, isn't he?
I think the circulation's a problem. Yeah, and he seems to be getting on with life. And he's, of course, done this university degree.
A Bachelor of Communications, isn't it? And now he tells me he's going into a house at Leura, and...
He's going to hang out up there like Norman Lindsay.
That's where Norman Lindsay started.
And of course he spent a lot of time painting in Italy. Came back with a lot of paintings, didn't he?
Well, he was away for 7 years. Altogether, 7 years in France, Spain and Italy.
Davina?
Yes. She had 2 years travelling around Europe and came back and started a university course for law and met a friend doing law also, and...
a fine young gentleman by the name of Dominic.
Oh, isn't he a fine young gentleman? She was so lucky to get a husband like that, because he's a wonderful husband.
Which brings us to me.
A man of many parts. He's done so many things. I don't know how many things you've done. Weren't you the captain of Tudor House?
I was the captain of Tudor House. I will claim that small trophy. And then, of course, Edwina.
A very smart girl, top of the university when she graduated in... What did she graduate in?
Economics.
Economics, that's right. And sent to New York by her firm, and she's a currency analyst. And...
You're very, very proud of Edwina, aren't you?
I am, because she's very thoughtful and a very loving girl. I'm proud of Davina too, because I think she's been a good mother, and yes, she is good fun. And
Edwina's met Craig.
And then she met Craig, yes. They came out to Lucy's wedding, and he took me and Davina to lunch up at Balmoral. And I could tell, I knew straight away he was madly in love with Edwina. So it was no surprise to me when they announced their engagement.
And what a beautiful wedding.
Yeah, it was a beautiful wedding. That elegant frock.
As you were saying before, how thoughtful she is, that she actually put that beautiful cloth that you made.
That, I haven't got over that. That was such an honour to have it on the altar at her wedding.
Tell us a bit about that cloth.
Well, when I was a student in the art class, we had to make a design. Everyone had to make a design and then put that design onto cloth. So I did my design and bought beautiful Italian linen and did afternoon tea cloth, cross stitch and hem stitching. And then there was enough left to make a small one, a tray cloth of the same. And I'd finished it by the time I was 20 and got good marks for it because it was a beautiful cloth. Pick up one thread at a time, over and over and over and over and over. But it was perfect mesh. The cloth was perfect mesh. Everything was perfect. Some cloth you'd a bit uneven mesh, but that was perfect. And I've used it and washed it many times. Day after Edwina came home, I was invited to a shower tea. I want someone to appreciate this because it's my most valuable possession to me. So I wrapped it up and gave it to her. When she opened it up at Mrs. Lum's, of course she was surprised, and they were all surprised. Did you do it? Did you do it? Did you do it? So I didn't think any more of it until when the priest came down with the little tray cloth and said, "We've got this on the altar." Oh. She early asked me would I pick 2 readings. And then she rang me up and said, "Gran, would you say grace at our reception?" But I thought, I'll say the grace I was taught as a child. My father, we never sat down to a meal that we all didn't say grace. I thought, I'll say that, so I did. And Jeremy came up to me, he said, "What are you going to say at the table?" And I said, "Oh," he said, "good, short and sweet."
You're the most practical human being I've ever met, Gran, and definitely the most efficient. There's no mucking around, straight to the point, no time or thoughts wasted.
But I'd feel embarrassed because everyone's saying, how do you do it? But look at her skin. They wouldn't know if they saw me today.
Oh, you look beautiful today, Gran. You look absolutely gorgeous on the 90th day of your 100th revolution of the sun. It's incredible.
Well, I had a very happy marriage, very hard marriage, because it was hard work and a lot of problems. First of all, a mother-in-law.
Right, I can see you holding your tongue there.
First day I went out to Fairy Bower after we announced our engagement, I went up to her and she said, "Oh, well, if you're all they say you are, it'll be all right." I never forgave her. Oh. And for 14 years I looked after her, and a difficult old woman she was, as well as her son, Austin, who was not difficult, but still I looked after him. It was a hard life. You think now, copper out in the paddock near the fence, to do washing. As Paul said, you nearly wanted a night horse to get to the lavatory, to ride the horse to the lavatory. No refrigeration, no electricity. If you wanted to iron, you had to go and start an engine to get the iron hot.
And here you are surfing the net. With your own computer.
I have a very dear niece who was Rex, the one that was so ill. His daughter is very close to me. There's a photo of her in there in the other room. She and her husband, Michael, they met in South Africa when she was on a holiday there. And he was an Englishman, but Pitt, his name, Michael Pitt. But they've come to Australia to live. And the 2 boys have both gone through Armidale University, both very well, graduated, Simon and Philip. She and Michael went back to Africa last month, in September, for a holiday. And she sent me a card with where they've been and all they've seen. So yesterday I thought, well, it's time I answered that card, so I sent her an email. And Keith had 3 children, Jill and Philip and Ian. Now, Jill is another niece who keeps in touch with me all the time.
Many, many, many people have been affected by you, and many, many people keep in touch with you. It's amazing. Well, those ones that are still alive, of course, you've outlived most of the people you've ever met.
Living,
I beg your pardon?
no one living now whom I knew as a child, or even as an adult. I don't know of anyone still alive. There's no one from school still alive. There's one getting near that way, Mother Vianney, the music teacher from Campbell. She's still alive, but she's only 96.
Well, Gran, that's going to happen when you score a ton. Which brings us to Lucy.
Yes. Lucy's a clever little thing too. The firm she works for in Sydney sent her to San Francisco. She'd worked there for some years and then changed over, but for 5 years she worked in San Francisco and met a man there whom she has now married. They were married in Australia, and he is learning a job of some sort. I just don't know what it is. There's something in development or something. And, well, she said, she's very clucky. But I think she'd love to have a child because she's 30. Is she 30 or 31? No, she was born in 72. Yeah, well, yeah, 32.
Now, Paul's a lot like your husband, my grandfather, Paul. I remember you always saying that he looked a lot like grandfather.
He does. I always remember when his father took him up to Longreach to go to the college up there, the agricultural college. And I said, what's it like? Just like Campbell, Gran. And that's what he wants. Loves the West and the soil. And
he inherited his father's love for the land.
Yes, he did. Angela's a very loving mother, loved her home and her garden and the country. And Morel, she loved a cat, which she had for 20 years, Tom.
Gran, what I'd really love to hear about is about you. Let's start with Kangaroo Valley.
It was a beautiful place. Lived right on the river. And we used to go fishing and all the things. I remember we'd go fishing and take them home for Mum to cook. Even eels we used to catch. And it was a lot of play. And then we moved to Cooma, east of Cooma. And from there, I went to boarding school. Sydney High I went to, Sydney Girls High. And I was never home again to live, because after I passed, I went on to train for a teacher, went to the uni.
You were living at Glebe while you were at university, weren't you?
Yes.
I remember you telling me about standing on tables dancing at parties.
Yeah. My brother Godfrey, who was also at the uni, was in the next building. A lot of boys were there, and it was just a boarding house, and that's where I boarded. And then I went to Strathfield to live. And I taught in Sydney after I graduated. I taught at Haberfield and then was sent to Campbell. 17 hours in the train on what a hot day. Oh, what a hot day. In the drought. And 3 weeks after I was there, I met Paul.
Was it love at first sight?
Well, I think it might have been. I thought he was pretty good. I saw him on the tennis court. I saw this man playing, and then he was brought up and introduced to me. His friend lived in the same boarding house that I did. And I was sitting in Orb's car, and he brought Paul up, introduced me. And I thought, oh, gosh, he looks great. And, well, it wasn't until the following year that I saw much of him. And then he started to look me up. He and Oz and Bill used to come to the pictures in Campbell every Wednesday night. And I was staying at the hotel, and the dreadful fire that burned the town down, and I ran upstairs to get my pack, get out, because there was a gale blowing. So getting out, we couldn't get out the front, we had to get out through a window, and Paul's car was there, and my things were all put in his car. And that's where it started. Because I'd just come from Sydney, bought new shoes. I remember these expensive shoes I'd bought and a few frocks. And packing up, I threw a bottle of ink into the case, and half the things were ruined with the ink. Yeah. And then it took us about 29, then in 30 we were married on the 29th of December. But I didn't have a big wedding, no wedding dress or anything. And it was a gale blowing at Wyong, and we had to go to the church at 6 o'clock in the morning to Mass and be married at the Mass, and then catch the train at 8:30 to go on our honeymoon. We went down to Bateman's Bay for a fortnight. No bridesmaids. Dad and Mum and my sister Ilma were the only witnesses. No frills for me for a wedding.
Why doesn't that surprise me? No nonsense.
I think Nella Regan never forgave me for not asking Austin. They didn't know that we didn't have a big wedding. I didn't have a wedding cake or anything. I remember Errol, my brother, and Jess, his wife, had cooked chops. While we were at Mass, they'd cooked chops. And we had some chops before we caught the train then to Sydney. When we got to Sydney, we went out to see Sister Rose, who was a nun at Parramatta. And then we caught the train down to Nowra and went on down to Bateman's Bay.
How long did you actually court for?
2 years.
And he was quite the sportsman.
Cricket and tennis. But he played full-back for New South Wales in Union. He was a tennis player and a cricket player and a footballer and a wonderful billiards player. Yeah.
And so when you met him, was he a war hero?
Yeah. Oh, I wouldn't say a hero, but he was discharged in 1920 medically unfit.
What was his responsibility?
Oh, he was 8th Mobiles Veterinary Corps. He had a horse.
And they were his greatest love over there, wasn't it? One of the biggest tragedies for him.
Yes, they had to kill the horses before they left. But Paul was brought home on a stretcher to Cairo, and then it just happened that a cousin of his who was a nurse was on the ship that brought them home, and he was then in Randwick Hospital, which was then the Soldiers' Hospital, for 2 years before he was medically discharged, medically unfit. Yeah.
And then you got married?
Yes.
And then it was just hard work on the land after that?
Yes. But I loved the land too. I grew to like it.
Isn't it amazing how you jumped on a train to go out to teach?
Yes, the back of beyond. When I was first told to go there, I said I wouldn't go, and I went down to the Department of Education and said, I'm not going right out there. And they even bought me a ticket. Made me go.
I guess that was a no, wasn't it? And who would have thought? You went out to a place, the back of beyond, you didn't want to go there, and you ended up staying there.
How many years was I there? I went there in 28, and I left in 86.
You thought maybe while you were there you might as well create a beautiful family.
When I turn on my computer now, instead of the apple being showing, it's Ross, Morel, Angela, Edwina, Craig and Sweetie. That's what opens up. Tomorrow I'll try and send an email to Edwina and tell her how much I loved seeing her wedding and thanking her for having it where I could go. I saw a lot of my grandchildren, and I do appreciate the fact that today they all remember that. I was sad to leave Fairybearer, but still I enjoyed my little house in town. But Paul didn't live very long. Twice he had a coronary. He still played bowls, local bowling green, but he loved his garden, especially roses. He had put in 80 roses, and he said, I'm going to put another lot on, another circle round there tomorrow. He'd been digging in the garden all day, and at night, about 11 o'clock, he'd gone to bed because he was tired, but he came out and said, I can't go to sleep, I'd like some hot milk and honey, which he loved. So I made the hot milk and honey and took it in and gave it to him. And I said, well, if you're going to be restless, I'll go and sleep in Gabriel's bed, because I was watching a movie on the television and I didn't want to disturb him if he went to sleep. So I went and slept in Gabriel's room, and the next morning, pretty early, about 6 o'clock, the phone rang. So I jumped out of bed and ran out to see what it was, and it was someone wanting Ross, who had been staying with us but had gone to Sydney the day before. Anyway, I went out to answer the phone, and as I walked back to my bed, Paul was lying on the floor, and I knew he had gone. So I called the doctor who lived 2 doors away and the priest, and they both came immediately, and the doctor said if I'd been standing beside him I couldn't have saved him. He said it was a massive coronary, I would say about 2 o'clock. So I rang Godfrey, he came straight in, and Father Ring blessed Paul, and I don't know who rang the Maxfield pot to come and take the body away, but Godfrey and I went to Mass, and Father Ring said a Mass for him. By the time we got home from Mass, Ilma had arrived because Angela had rung Ilma to come, and she had come with her boys. Oh, dreadful, terrible shock. Anyway, it was a big funeral. Paul was very popular because he was such a great sportsman. Angela was very good. It was a very sad Christmas following that. But anyway, he didn't suffer. I at the time I was cross because he went so quickly. But seeing people that live in agony, he didn't suffer long. He must have got out of bed to do something, and he dropped on the floor because his head hit the floor, and where his head hit the floor there was a bit of blood on the floor. So it must have been instant. So I'm grateful that he didn't suffer, because I've seen so many suffer for years and years.
Tell me about the garden at Campbell. I mean, you know, it was just a beautiful garden, and I and my brothers and the Regan girls, we all pretty much grew up in your garden.
Yes. We had 3 blocks of land, and the house was in the middle, and either side were lawns and gardens, especially roses and trees and lawn everywhere. It was a big garden, 3 blocks. Well, after Paul died, I looked after it myself and tried to do all that he'd wanted to do, and planted more trees and flowers, and it was a great playground for the children, the grandchildren and the children across the road, who still all call me Gran, and they keep in touch with me too. Beautiful roses. But finally I sold 1 block on the northern side, so that made it a bit easier for me. But my grandchildren spent a lot of time, because the river Castlereagh flowed after rain. Otherwise there was only sand because the water went down. But the children had a lot of fun in the sand in the river and in the garden. And when Ilma would come over, then Godfrey's children would come very often. So they'd all play together.
A tale that we've all been proud to tell is when you caught that snake that was sliding over.
I was standing at the sink, and I looked down, and there was a little green snake about, I suppose, 2 feet or a bit more long, and it was sliding in going towards the refrigerator, and I put my foot on its head and squashed its head on the floor.
All my friends think that it was like a 10-metre brown snake.
No, it was green, a tree snake.
Snake's a snake. They scare the hell out of me, Gran. I don't know what the hell you were doing.
They do to me.
And it would have been much more disturbing, sort of like not knowing where it was.
I just, left foot went right to its head.
No more snake.
No more snake. But the first snake I ever killed at Fairy Bower, the men were all away, and I killed it just at the back of the house. So I killed it with a shovel. So when I had it dead, I hung it on the gate. They'd see it before they came in.
What sort of snake was that?
Oh, it was a big brown snake. But Angela shot a terrific lot of snakes there. Oh dear. Anyway, snakes become part of your life in the bush. Well, I stayed on gardening every day and looking after things, and I had a big operation, cancer of the bowel, and after that I found I wasn't quite so nimble. That was in 84. So I thought, well, I'd better sell out. and I put the place on the market, and it was on the 26th of September Ilma came to take me to Gurianawal. And I stayed there a couple of days, and then I came to Sydney to Gabriel and started looking for an apartment. Took me 3 months to find what I wanted. Looked at many, didn't like them. I was looking at one across the road, and this was advertised, and Gabriel said, "Oh, Mum, you can never afford that." Anyway, I said, "I'll go and have a look." The agent was here, and I walked in the door, and I looked across there, and I said, "I've got to have it." This was like the Campbell home that looked onto the river and the trees. Well, here I could look onto the trees, and the bus stop at the door, the church down the road, the shop around the street. I bought it on the 6th of November at auction, and Morell came with me, just Morell and I. So I bid and got it. It needed a lot of work, a great deal of work. I got it painted and new carpet down. Anyway, I love my little unit. There are lots of things I could have had better.
Oh, you've made a gorgeous home out of it. I mean, this is where we're sitting right now, obviously, as we talk, looking out onto Chiswick Gardens in the safety of this beautiful home that you made for yourself. I'd also like to mention your time with the Red Cross. You gave so much of your life to the Red Cross.
And I got a presentation at Red Cross House for my voluntary work for Red Cross. Ross came with me for that. Citizen of the Year in Campbell.
Yeah, I was going to say we were there for that, and you were up against Mrs. Lefebvre. I don't think she had a chance in hell.
Yeah, I found that the other day, but I don't put it on the wall.
It was a very, very proud moment for all of us. Citizen of the Year award.
Yes.
It's pretty incredible, Gran.
Yeah.
And of course, bridge has been a big part of your life.
It has. I'd started to learn bridge in Campbell from Judy Taylor and Joan Bryan and Nora Borthwick. We had a 4. We were very primitive, but still, I remember Dorinda Sullivan came over and walked round the table for 2 days telling us what to do. And then Judy Taylor had the idea to get an expert to show us, so she got in touch with Paul Marston, and he came up for 2 days and gave us instructions. I found it hard to understand what he said because he's a New Zealander. Anyway, and he said, "Well, when you come to Sydney, I've got a club in Sydney, come and join the club." Well, when I came down, I didn't for 6 months, but about October, I felt I'd love to have a game of bridge. So I went along, and Paul Marsden, who owns the club, he gave me a bit of welcome, and I enrolled. My number on the bridge is 427. There are now over 3,000 in that club. But I'd like to do the bridge in the paper every day, see if I could get it out. And I play rummy when I've nothing to read.
And your crossword puzzle. And just a quirky little question, what do you think of John Howard?
I won't say.
What do you think of George Bush?
Worse. I mean, it's Australian men to go over there to fight. There was no need. He invaded it. There was no reason for him to fight, only he wanted oil. And it was an invasion. And I don't think Howard should ever have agreed with Bush to do it. Because it's put Australia, we don't know what's going to happen here. Yeah. And he didn't ask any of Australians for an opinion about it. He did it without consulting. Before we did anything, there should have been a referendum to see if Australians agreed with it. Majority of Australians don't agree with it.
I didn't actually see the march of people that wanted the war.
200,000 marched in Sydney.
Against the war. Where was the march for the war?
I don't know. There wasn't one.
Exactly.
Yeah. I condemn him because I think he's so elated to be so friendly with the stupid president of America, who's a complete ignoramus. No, I'm not a Howard fan.
You love your home here.
My home and my little garden on the balcony. Look at the flowers there. I love those little violets, native violets.
What's your favourite flower?
Oh, I think roses. I think roses. I love roses. Yeah. But I love all flowers. Yeah. Even the yellow ones, they're so cheery. Beautiful.
And what's your favourite music?
Oh. Beethoven. Simon, the dear thing, came to see me unexpectedly last night and brought me some beautiful yellow flowers, so cheery and bright, and it was lovely to see him. He's put on some weight.
But you have a lovely connection with Simon, don't you?
Yes, yes. He's very grateful. Yeah, yes.
Well, Gran, I would just like to say, on behalf of all your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, just how much we all love you and how blessed we all feel for having you in our lives, for having your support and having your love. You've got us all through a lot of hard times, and you've just been such a great example, and I know from the bottom of my heart that I'm speaking on behalf of everybody, not just your direct family that we've talked about, but also everybody that you've ever met in life. On behalf of all of these people, we all just love you very, very much, and thank you so much for being you, and thank you for sticking around for so long so we could enjoy you all these years.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Now, not on this, but I must tell you how I appreciate how everybody at Bridge, the club, see, there could be, sometimes there are 80 people there, but they're all so thoughtful for me. And everyone knows me. May, hello May, hello. I haven't a clue who they are, but they all know May.
Well, Gran, this has been a long interview, it's been a long conversation, and it's tiring me out. You could go on forever. But I just want to say, thank you so much, and God bless, Gran.
Well, thank you very, very much. God bless you too.